We cannot meet our charter duty to protect the well-being, health, and safety of our constituents without an adequately staffed police department, and we continue to lose more officers than we can hire continuously, quarter over quarter, year after year.
That's Council President Sarah Nelson from the Seattle City Council, calling on her colleagues to support a new measure on police recruiting and retention this week, also defending her push to ask for a new test for police recruits as well. So, what impact could the council's proposed changes make within the SPD, and what's happening with yet another lawsuit facing Chief Adrian Diaz, plus an ethics and elections issue facing Councilmember Tanya Wu, and a disastrous last few days for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. All this and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and I'm joined by my co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I know you've been battling through your first ever bout with COVID. I heard a few coughs as we were getting fired up here. How are you doing, man? Are you doing okay?
Yeah, today is the best day in about a week. I feel like a normal human being again. Right. Still coughing, right. But yeah, on the mend.
Okay, good. Good to hear it. Good to hear it. I hope you get better soon. That's not a fun thing to wrestle with, and I'm glad you're doing okay. Thank you, David. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of City Hall. And a special thanks to the patrons who keep this show going. Sean, thank you for your support. You really keep this show rolling, and we appreciate that. Folks, if you do want to become a patron, guess what? You get access to Patrons First content before anybody else. We'll answer your questions about City Hall and the podcast, too. Check it out on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. A huge thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get the party started with right here, right now. Keeping you up to date on current events, folks, the Seattle City Council is looking at the Families Education Preschool and Promise levy this week. That's up for renewal next year. The council also breaking down what's going on with its LEAD programs for non-criminal arrest diversion programs there. The Seattle Film Commission reporting on its work to the council this week, too. But, David, I want to look at the big vote for the Seattle City Council this week on their efforts to improve police recruitment and retention. The council is doing a few things. They are suggesting, not requiring, that the Public Safety Civil Service Commission consider changing the test it asks recruits to take. This is an effort to align with other police agencies in the state. Most others use this public safety test, the PST as it's called. There are a few other pieces to this as well, including one to add an SPD employee to personally connect with recruits after they take these tests. That whole connection's not going very well right now. Plus, there are some new requirements for reporting out to the council on how recruiting is going. The vote was unanimous from the council in supporting this. Council President Nelson really touted this as a council that was working together. But David, what was your take of the work behind this measure? And I guess the council's strong defense, as I heard it, of trying a new police recruiting test.
Yeah, I mean, my take on this is it does, to an extent, like kind of highlight. So, I mean, we know this council and Mayor Harrell have staked a lot on growing the size of the police department, improving public safety, improving recruitment and retention. I guess in a lot of ways, those issues are so big and hairy and in some ways kind of systemic. We're talking about departments nationwide competing for applicants. What's left to the to the city council to sort of tweak is the bureaucratic process, which is what we're seeing here. So it, doesn't really stand out as being all that sexy, but it's because, it's sort of difficult to make a big swing on this stuff. I would say maybe the contract is that big swing. But as far as legislatively, what the city council can actually do, there's, other than kind of talk a good game about supporting the police department, the kind of thing they have the most control over is the bureaucratic process.
Right.
And so that looks like this, which is, moving employees from one department to the other, talking about which tests are being used, whether it all adds up to significant changes in the number of people who become officers, I don't know.
Yeah, that does remain to be seen. And I thought there was one important amendment to this legislation, David, coming from Councilmember Morales, asking that the SPD report on the progress it is making on hiring women specifically. That was identified as a priority this year in the 30 by 30 report we've talked about on this program. The goal of that program, to have women make up 30% of the sworn officers in the SPD by the year 2030. That number is at about 16% right now. And this report actually brought up a lot of things that are very damaging for the SPD, allegations of sexual harassment, discrimination within the department. And then this week also, we have yet another lawsuit facing Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz, Seattle Police Captain Eric Greening, who was a candidate against Diaz in terms of filling this job a short while ago. He's alleging that Chief Diaz discriminated against women and people of color at the department. I wanted to try to talk about this in relation to what we're talking about with recruitment here, David. Are we at a tipping point when it comes to the trust that Chief Diaz has or does not have within the SPD? I just see these different legal cases mounting here, and I wonder about that in looking at this whole recruitment effort that's going on, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent, Chief Diaz's hold on the respect of the larger department has always been a little bit tenuous. I mean, the way he came into the job was, he became interim after being elevated by Carmen Best, right. A new mayor and Bruce Harrell kept him there. And so I think, I think there are divided opinions, we'll say, on within the department on his position there. I also think that these recent allegations and lawsuits have certainly lit a little more fire under him. Mayor is talking publicly about how he's reviewing Chief Diaz's performance. The Herald's office says, we do that with all department heads. But, if your boss is out there talking about how they're evaluating your performance and will decide on your future at a later date, no one feels good about that.
Right.
So, I don't know where it goes from here for Chief Diaz exactly. It's I would say certainly his position there is more tenuous now than it was a few months ago. But as far as, the department goes in recruitment, probably the bigger problem is it's not, we talked about reputation of the department. This certainly isn't helping, especially if the goal is to hire more women. And there's all these reports coming out about how women don't feel good working there. That's, and by all accounts, the recruitment of women to the Seattle Police Department has been particularly bad. So, I think from that perspective too, just, aside from Chief Diaz, just the reputation of the department doesn't look great to the public. And, all these people talk to each other. It's a smallish world.
Yeah. And these issues with women in the department, that's been around longer than Chief Diaz has been chief. I know that. So that's something that's going to be uncovering over the next couple of weeks and months here. And we'll see how these new measures in place for the council go in terms of helping with these recruiting numbers, which are very low right now, but looking to be on the upswing over the next few months. All right. Moving on to our next story. David, I wanted to follow up on a piece you wrote in the Seattle Times recently about the big vote coming up next week on delivery driver wages for the council. The city's Ethics and Elections Commission has asked Councilmember Tanya Wu to recuse herself from that vote. Her father-in-law owns a restaurant in Chinatown ID. That could give her a financial stake in the vote. So Ethics and Elections has said you may want to recuse yourself here. Councilmember Wu actually reached out to Ethics and Elections herself. But as of your reporting Tuesday, it sounded like she was not 100% sure she's going to pull herself out of this voting process. What's going on here?
Yeah, and I'll tweak it just a little bit. She hasn't gone to the full commission yet. She just, reached out to the director of the commission for advice, which is not binding by any stretch. It's just, the person who knows the most about the ethics code giving out his advice. And his advice here was
Barnett. Yep.
Not only does her father-in-law own this restaurant, that alone wouldn't necessarily require she recuse herself, but he, the restaurant uses these delivery apps. And at one point, apparently Councilmember Wu told Wayne Barnett, the director of the Ethics Commission, that he is seeing fewer small orders from the restaurant since the law passed, which is kind of the same complaint that people who have been pushing for repeal have been saying. So, all that's to say that her family has a financial stake, or could at least theoretically have a financial stake in this vote. That is kind of, for him, was a clear line that she shouldn't cross. But yeah, it's interesting. Most elected leaders, when they get this advice, follow it, and that's basically the end. She says that she is going to go to the full commission, get their formal opinion on this, and then she kind of left the door open for seeking out opinions elsewhere. I'm not really sure where else she would go, but her statement was not, I am going to recuse myself. It sounds like she's clearly very much wants to vote on this. And so, that's kind of interesting. I will say that, like, even a few days ago, I was 100% sure that this is probably going to be an 8-1 vote for this bill anyway. So what does it matter? It does sound like there have been some conversations. I don't know how substantive they are, but some conversations with some council members, Councilmember Hollingsworth,
Yes.
and more with some of the people who are pushing back against this change. So there have been like some slow evolution behind the scenes around this. I don't know nor expect necessarily that would be enough to derail the vote next week. But, you would think that if this is like 100% in the bag, maybe Councilmember Wu just says, okay, fine, I'll recuse myself. So it's a 7-1 vote instead of 8-1. Just something that I'm observing and monitoring.
Yeah, that's not a bad call. And thinking about that no vote, I imagine it would come from Councilmember Morales, who's really been pushing for more time to have this pay-up law be in effect and really monitor the differences there. I will point out, folks, I talked with Councilmember Moore and Councilmember Hollingsworth on the Council Edition show I do for the Seattle channel. You'll see that later on this week on the Seattle channel, and I urge you to listen to that because we did talk about delivery driver wages, and it's exactly what you're talking about here, David. They have some concerns. I think Councilmember Hollingsworth was very clear. She wants to get to yes on this, but she definitely had some concerns when it comes to how drivers are compensated per mile, how they're compensated when it comes to the reimbursement they get per mile in terms of keeping up their cars with gas and repairs and things like that. So I think there may still be some wiggle room in this as well, and I'll be interested to see how they how they pull that together there. But some interesting things going on with this measure here, from the ethics concerns to what some of the different council members are working on here as well. So we'll keep an eye on that for next week. Very much looking forward to that conversation. All right, moving on here. Up next, the continuing troubles facing the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, another departure from the RHA, and now a local official calling for the authority to be disbanded. Yikes. More details next on Now Hear This. Well, it started with the chief financial officer of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority getting fired last week. Then we saw the numbers from the RHA's point-in-time count, illustrating that homelessness has increased by 23% in King County, at least in terms of what they've measured, since 2022. And then on top of that, the interim CEO for the authority, Darrell Powell, says he is taking himself out of the running for the permanent job. He wrote a letter that said there are too many cooks in the kitchen. King County Councilmember Reagan Dunn told Como News this week it's time for the county's commitment to this agency to end.
It's not going to work. What we need to do as King County is take those dollars back. We still don't have anywhere near the infrastructure we need for behavioral health challenges.
David, I want to start with the leadership piece here. The KCRHA has not had a permanent leader since Mark Dones left very abruptly in May of last year. Powell is out of the running now, but there are still two candidates who want the job. Final interviews as reported in the Seattle Times, and I know you helped out with this coverage here. That's happening on May 23rd. We don't know who those candidates are yet, but David, I just wanted to get your take on this. What does Powell's decision not to seek the permanent job say to you?
I don't have insight into his brain. It says to me that it's a really hard job. You have to really have the spine and the patience, I think, to do this job. I think Mark Dones called it herding cats at one point. And we talk about homelessness. It's a very political position because you're kind of triangulating. I mean, it might be arguably the most political position because you're sitting there at the intersection of Seattle and King County, of course, the biggest players, but then all these other outlier kind of suburban cities that have their own priorities, not to mention all of the service providers who each have a kind of different approach and a different philosophy and what the best way to approach homelessness is. And so getting the whole KCRHA mission is to get all of those people basically rowing in the same direction, if not exactly on the same page. Doing that is no small task. And so, not to mention that it hasn't been a paragon of functionality for its existence. I mean, it took a long time to get Mark Dones on board, and then Mark Dones left, and now they've been sort of in between. And so, I sometimes wonder why anyone would want this job, but I think that about a lot of government jobs anyway. So, I don't know Mr. Powell, but I do know that it was in some ways kind of an impossible job.
Yeah, no, and I just think about this in terms of the history of the RHA. It got off to a pretty rough start, launching essentially right before the pandemic shut down so many parts of our lives there. But emerging from COVID, I think you're right. It's just never seemed to build up enough momentum. Even the big funders like the city of Seattle have reduced the amount they're giving to the RHA, as we've reported here. I guess I just wanted to ask that bigger question, David. Should the RHA shut down? I know Reagan Dunn has called for it on the King County Council. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it should, but I think it could be. It won't be before the end of the year, but I do think next year is going to be a big moment for it, because that's when the agreement between Seattle and KCRHA is up for renewal.
It's more than $100 million right there, you bet.
Yeah, Council President Nelson has been pretty explicit that that's going to be a time when she wants the city council to take a hard look at it. Mayor Harrell has said the same thing. I don't think it's a good sign for the KCRHA that Mayor Harrell's kind of preferred leader of that department in Darrell Powell no longer wants the job. So I would say there have been rosier days for the KCRHA. And so, I think next year in particular is going to be a really kind of crucial time for that body.
Yeah, it will be. And I know with all the talk about budget shortfalls that the Seattle City Council has been going through, they're going to be really, really examining the different dollars they're trying to send out the door over the next year here. So that's a very apt observation there about what's going to be happening later on this year when they try to renew that contract, or perhaps not. That's going to be a big, big discussion here. All right, but I wanted to talk about some bonus transportation coverage here. The first of two public hearings on Seattle's transportation levy occurring this week, a levy that would be the largest in city history at $1.45 billion. And David, I saw an interesting piece in The Urbanist about this. The push is on from the Seattle Department of Transportation to increase the amount of levy projects it's starting. And I found this was actually pretty amazing to see, where we used to see one project per month start construction in Seattle over the past couple of years. That number is now up to 2 per month, with Director Greg Spott saying that could increase even more by the end of the year. I just wanted to look at this because I'm trying to figure out if this is a level of accomplishment or achievement that SDOT can sustain, or is this just a big push before a levy vote this fall? What do you see in terms of this added emphasis from SDOT to start some new projects?
I think in a lot of ways it's making up for lost time. The city has, every quarter they have a planned budget, and then at the end of the quarter they have what we actually spent budget, and that is over the course of the last, I don't know, probably dating back to 2018. I don't know exactly how far back, but basically every quarter the planned budget has been higher than the actual spent budget, and there are a lot of reasons for that. COVID being a big one, and concrete workers strike, and some other weather and stuff like that. But it just has not. They haven't gotten dollars out the door as quickly as they wanted.
Right.
That's not fundamentally a problem, because it's not like they have to spend every last cent by the end of the levy's intake period. They can continue spending past that. But, you're trying to build a theory of the case and why voters should continue to support levies. And so to do that, you want to have shown as much progress as you can. And so I do think that this has been a big push to kind of, and they've been forecasting this for a while. When I was a transportation reporter, I'd ask them about this, and they would say, "This is going to be a big year. This is going to be a big year." You as a reporter sometimes get skeptical of, we're going to be better or faster this year than we have been in the past. But it turns out they were actually kind of ramping up, and they might be making good on that.
That I'll be very interested to see how that plays out. And I thought there was another interesting point made in The Urbanist about this. The new levy, as at least they're interpreting it, and I think I would agree with this, it really only specifies spending levels and doesn't have as much of the definitive project list that we recalled from the Move Seattle levy. And this idea is, I think, essentially with this levy, hey, will you approve this spending power by approving this levy? And then we'll figure out more specifics about the only commitment I'm seeing here is this plan to build 250 blocks of new sidewalks before 2029. Some thoughts about this, David, maybe even some concerns. We don't have as many specifics in this levy. That's the criticism I'm hearing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think both Mayor Durkin and Mayor Harrell were frustrated to an extent of what the previous levy, which had been written under Mayor Murray, kind of, it was so prescriptive, and that it was kind of difficult for them to move within that. And then also, it was meant that you had these kind of specific promises that, of course, then you got to keep them, and that's a little more difficult. And so I think this is setting up this is setting up a scenario where current and future mayors could theoretically be a little more flexible on that spending. The downside of that is you are making these decisions kind of in real time. I mean, on a grand scale, the kind of downsides of that could be seen in Sound Transit, which is past an idea of what they were going to build. But here we are 8 years later after Sound Transit 3 passed, and we're still debating station locations and things like that.
Right.
So that's the kind of downside of not laying out what you're going to fund a little more specifically. There are reasons to understand going more specific or less specific. I do think it's easier on mayors to an extent to have less specific, because then they can more freely spend that money how they want.
Right. And I guess I'm just trying to look at it from a voter's perspective. Is that going to be, I don't think anyone's going to make the argument that we should be spending less on transportation, if anything. And this is a pretty sizable levy, as we've brought up before. This is something that's going to raise the cost for a typical homeowner by about 70%. So $24 a month going up to about $41 a month for the average homeowner out there. I guess with that jump in money, do you want more specifics out there as a voter? I guess that's the balance that I think the city council is going to have to take here. How prescriptive should we be if we're going to ask for these extra dollars? I guess that's the big part of it that's sticking with me, because that's not an insignificant change in terms of how much this levy is going up for the average person.
No, it's not. And, I do think politically it's often viewed as smart to, even if it's not the biggest part of a package, have something in there that's really specific and tangible that people can kind of attach to.
That's the sidewalks.
Yeah. I don't know if sidewalks is that thing, if it's kind of sexy enough. I think of kind of at the state level when they passed the big transportation package there, the Democrats who were pushing for it really had pushed on the free transit for anybody 18 or under. That's people can kind of wrap their head around it. It's immediate. There's sort of immediate political dividends to that. They understand what the legislature is doing because, hey, my kid had to pay last week. Now they don't have to pay.
Right.
Stuff like that, I think, does have political weight. I don't know what that is in this one. I don't know if it exists exactly. It's not like the streetcar is being built or... So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I'm not sure kind of what the anchor to this is.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I think they've tried to anchor on those sidewalks, but you're right. That is not a sexy project at all. But I think it is something that people have been calling for. And if this is the council that was brought in for quote unquote good governance, et cetera, then we'll see how that plays out in a transportation levy. But a lot of work still ahead on this for the council. I should point out the second public hearing on the transportation levy is coming up on June 4th, if you would like to get involved. All right, coming up. We could soon be talking about another challenging initiative on the ballot box, a statewide initiative here. This in regard to how we heat our homes. We're talking about the energy behind an initiative all about energy choices. That's ahead on What's Next. Well, let's talk about a new measure gathering signatures right now, I-2066, sponsored by the Building Industry Association of Washington, BIAW, which would repeal parts of a new state law that's meant to speed up Puget Sound Energy's transition away from natural gas. It would also prohibit any city or county to pass laws that would discourage the use of gas for any form of heating. The BIAW has until July 5th to bring in about 325,000 signatures. They're supposed to push for about 400,000, so they make sure they're all legit. But David, I just wanted to ask on this, do you think they're going to be able to get them? Will we see this on the ballot? What's your feel on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been through one of these processes. My understanding is if they're really just launching it now, unless they are swimming in money and can hire a literal army of signature gatherers, that seems like a stretch to me. I'm not going to make a prediction because those come back to bite you. But yeah, it seems like a tight timeline.
Yeah, tight timeline for sure. But it just felt like it fell in with a lot of these Let's Go Washington measures in some ways. I'm thinking specifically about the Climate Commitment Act, possibly repealing that. Does this fit in that camp almost? A number of people trying to fight back, because I remember last year no initiatives on the ballot, and this year we're going to have at least 3 and maybe more with this one here. Maybe this groundswell of support for these pushbacks, I think, to Democratic leadership here in the state. Does this maybe fall in that camp and maybe gain some of the support those other measures have?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think the gas heat debate has sort of snuck its way into the culture war. You know, we saw this at a federal level with, you know, gas stoves and things like that. And so, and that I would say fits in with some of these other initiatives, which have kind of were, you know, not to say that the people pushing them don't have sort of legitimate policy interests here or legitimate concerns about the legislation. At the same time, they do kind of nicely fit into certain sort of hot button topics that seem to motivate people, I think, to get out, or at least attempt to motivate people to get out. And you know, I think the question about gas and its use in buildings and homes is one that I would say fits into that category.
Yeah, and it was interesting too, because this was a measure from Olympia that passed at the end of the session, and there was some controversy around this. A lot of the people who opposed the measure said this is kind of a last-minute thing. You're just trying to run this through at the 11th hour, and so I think that led to a lot of the pushback that we've seen. And I should point out, too, that Representative Jim Walsh, who is one of the key figures behind Let's Go Washington, has worked on a few initiatives of his own with regard to natural gas here. He has some concerns about this. I don't know if he's going to be going through the full process to gather signatures here, but I think you're right. I feel like there could be a culture war component to this, and just this idea of choice maybe is where I'm going with this, David. This is this idea of I want to choose how much I pay for gasoline when it comes to the Climate Commitment Act. I want to choose what kind of energy that heats my home with an act like this. I feel like it kind of falls into that cup there, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And I think climate change generally has, become politicized to the point that it's a hot button topic. And you know, on one hand, choice has been sort of the counter argument to certain pushes that are supposed to be related to climate change, which is I want choices in how I can heat my home. And I mean, to an extent, resiliency too, I suppose, has been a piece, which is, you know, we need multiple sources of energy.
Right. Yeah. This is a battle that will be continuing through the summer here. We'll see if they can make it by July 5th. But you're right. That doesn't give them a lot of time to gather 400,000 signatures. So we'll see what happens, but certainly something the BIAW will be pushing on over the next couple of weeks. All right. Well, we do need to wrap up the show here, David. I noticed that the lineup for Bumbershoot is out. I saw you posting about this and noting there were a number of artists who like to talk through songs just as much as they sing them, which I thought was a very interesting observation. Is there any artist in particular that you want to see talk it out? What's your thought here?
Well, I have one small child and another one due at around that time.
Whoa! So hey, congrats, man! That's awesome.
Oh yeah, thank you. I guess I hadn't told you that. And so I don't think I'm going to be going to Bumbershoot. But if I were, I would certainly go and visit, go see Pavement. I like Pavement.
Totally.
I don't know how they sound these days. And I like Kurt Vile and I like Courtney Barnett. All of them, their singing is sort of halfway between singing and talking. And apparently I like that. So,
yeah, I would make that argument also for Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, who take all the popular songs and turn them into a punk type of a thing. Maybe less talking, but more shouting with those guys. But I'd love to see them too. But well, thank you for sharing, David, and congrats on the new Bambino on the way too. That is great news for you. And we'll keep people posted on what's going on there too, I suppose. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me here. Thanks to everybody who is listening to this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to patrons who support the show. If you want to be a patron, find this podcast on Patreon, please. Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.